I've spent my entire life being second best in my parents' eyes. It wasn't something they ever admitted, of course. It was in the subtle differences, the small moments that piled up like stones until they became a mountain I couldn't climb over. My sister Emily was their golden child. I remember sitting at my piano recital when I was 9, scanning the audience for my parents' faces, only to discover later they'd skipped it because Emily had a minor cold. Not sick enough to stay in bed, mind you, just enough that my mother thought she needed extra attention. Every report card I brought home with straight A's would earn me a distracted good job, while they were busy planning elaborate celebrations for Emily's B- in math because she really tried this time. The refrigerator door became a shrine to her mediocrity while my achievements collected dust in drawers. When I made varsity track as a freshman, my parents missed my first meet because Emily needed new clothes for a school dance. I can still feel the sting of watching other parents cheer from the bleachers while I ran my heart out for an audience of strangers. By high school, I'd accepted my role as the family afterthought. I worked weekends and summers to save for a used car while Emily was gifted a brand new one on her 16th birthday. Because she needs something reliable, Dad explained, as if my needs were somehow less important. College was the final blow. We've been saving for Emily's education, my mother announced when I brought home my acceptance letters. You've always been so independent. We know you'll figure it out. And I did, working 2 jobs between classes while drowning in student loans. Meanwhile, Emily changed her major 3 times, took a semester off to find herself, and never once worried about how it would all be paid for. I remember calling home after landing my first real job, excited to share my news. 20 minutes into the conversation, I realized they hadn't asked a single question about it. Instead, they gushed about Emily's new boyfriend, how they'd invited him for dinner, how they just knew he was the one. For years, I tried convincing myself it was all in my head. I made excuses for them. They worried more about Emily because she needed more support. They were proud of me but just showed it differently. They assumed I knew they loved me without having to say it. But as I stand here today, 32 years old, watching them fawn over Emily's pregnancy announcement, their voices practically trembling with joy about becoming grandparents, I feel that familiar knot in my throat. The one that's been there since childhood, growing tighter with each passing year, threatening to choke the words I've never had the courage to say. Until now. The invitation arrived via text, the way most family communications did these days. We're celebrating Emily's 2-month job promotion on Saturday. Hope you can make it. Not a question of whether I was available, just the usual assumption that I would rearrange my life as needed. And like always, I did. I spent 40 minutes choosing an outfit that wouldn't draw criticism, another 30 on makeup that would look professional but not trying too hard, as my mother once described my appearance at a family function. I even stopped for flowers, Emily's favorites, of course, because showing up empty-handed would give them something else to whisper about when I left. When I arrived at my parents' house, the driveway was already full. I recognized Emily's car, her boyfriend's expensive SUV, my aunt and uncle's minivan, and several others belonging to family friends who had apparently made the invitation list before me. I parked a block away and walked, balancing the flowers and a wrapped gift while navigating the uneven sidewalk in heels that pinched my toes. The front door was unlocked. No one noticed when I stepped inside, the ambient noise of celebration drowning out my entrance. I stood in the foyer for nearly a minute before my father spotted me. "Oh, you made it," he said, his tone suggesting mild surprise rather than pleasure. "Everyone's in the dining room." I followed him through the house I'd grown up in, noticing new photos on the walls, mostly of Emily, her boyfriend, their recent vacation. None of me. I'd stopped looking for them years ago, but the absence still registered somewhere deep in my chest. The dining room table had been extended to its full length, draped in my mother's best tablecloth. China plates, crystal glasses, and elaborate floral centerpieces created a magazine-worthy setting. Everyone was already seated, animated conversations flowing. My mother was arranging a final place setting at the table's very end, an obvious afterthought. "There she is," Emily called out, her voice carrying that familiar note of performative affection. "We were about to start without you." As I surveyed the scene, reality crystallized with painful clarity. This wasn't just a celebration, it was a coronation. Emily's modest promotion at the insurance company had been transformed into a career triumph worthy of royal recognition. The carefully arranged seating placed her at the center, my parents flanking her like proud courtiers. Champagne bottles stood ready for toasts. A professionally printed banner hung across the wall. "Congratulations on your success, Emily." And there I was, the perpetual audience member, expected to applaud from the sidelines of my own family. Something shifted inside me then. Not a dramatic break, but a quiet, fundamental realignment, like tectonic plates moving beneath still waters. Without a word, I set the flowers and gift on a side table. I didn't slam them down or make a scene. I simply placed them there, turned around, and walked out. No tears, no angry declarations, no drama for them to recount later as evidence of my jealousy or instability. Just the soft sound of the front door closing behind me as I chose, for the first time, not to participate in my own diminishment. As I walked back to my car, my phone buzzed with text messages. I didn't check them. Whatever narrative they were crafting about my departure would continue without my contribution. That night marked the beginning of something new, not the end of a relationship, but the end of my willingness to accept the terms it had always been offered on. The doorbell rang at exactly 10:17 the next morning. I wasn't expecting anyone, but somehow, I knew exactly who it was. The universe has a way of warning you when a storm is coming. My father stood on my porch, chin lifted with that familiar righteous indignation. My mother hovered half a step behind him, her lips pressed into that thin line that had silently judged my choices for 29 years. "We need to talk," he said, not waiting for an invitation before pushing past me into my living room. The home I'd purchased without a dollar of their help. The sanctuary I'd created despite rather than because of them. About what? I asked, though I already knew. Last night's departure had violated the unspoken family contract. Suffer quietly, maintain appearances. My mother placed her purse precisely on the edge of my coffee table. "Your behavior last night was completely unacceptable." I waited for more, perhaps an acknowledgement of why I'd left, or even a belated question about my feelings. Instead, my father cleared his throat and delivered the real purpose of their visit. "You've embarrassed us," he said, "and now you need to make it right." The dinner bill came to $1,200. "Since you ruined the evening, we think it's appropriate that you cover it." The audacity struck me like a physical blow. In that moment, everything crystallized, every birthday forgotten, every accomplishment dismissed, every struggle I'd weathered alone. They hadn't come to mend our relationship. They'd come for my checkbook. $1,200. I repeated slowly, feeling a laugh bubble up from somewhere deep and wounded. For a dinner I was barely invited to, celebrating someone else, where I was seated at the end of the table like an afterthought. "Don't be dramatic," my mother sighed. "Family helps family." "Does it?" My voice was surprisingly steady. Where was family when I needed $800 for my first month's rent after college? Where was family when my car broke down last year? Where was family when I was working 2 jobs to pay tuition because you decided Emily's education was the priority? "That's different," my father snapped. "We raised you to be independent." "No," I corrected him. "You raised me to be invisible, to need nothing, to expect nothing." My mother's face hardened. "After everything we've done for you, what exactly have you done?" The words escaped before I could contain them. Years of unspoken questions finally finding voice. "Name one time you put me first. One time I wasn't an afterthought." The silence that followed held decades of pretense, now stripped bare. My parents exchanged glances, a wordless communication that excluded me even now. "If this is how you feel," my father finally said, "perhaps we should go." I nodded, suddenly exhausted by the weight of expectations I'd never be able to meet. "Perhaps you should." They left without another word, the door closing behind them with a quiet click that somehow echoed louder than any slam could have. In their wake, I felt something unexpected, not grief or anger, but relief. The truth had finally been spoken aloud. I wasn't a daughter to them. I was a resource, a supporting character in the story of their real family. And for the first time, I was free to write my own ending. I thought the confrontation at my house would be the end of it. I was wrong. The notification chimed on my phone just after lunch, and something in my gut clenched before I even looked at the screen. There it was, my mother's profile picture next to a status update that already had 27 likes. Heartbroken today, her post began. "After sacrificing everything for our children, sometimes the ones you love still turn their backs on you. Our daughter not only abandoned her sister's celebration dinner, but is now refusing to take responsibility for the expense she caused our family. Please keep us in your thoughts as we navigate this painful betrayal from someone we've given everything to. The calculated precision of it stole my breath. Every word carefully chosen, sacrificing everything, painful betrayal, given everything. I scrolled through the comments, each one a knife. You deserve better. Some children are so ungrateful. Sending prayers for your ungrateful daughter to see the light. My phone rang, my cousin Jessica, the family gossip monitor. Have you seen what your mom posted? Everyone's talking about it. This was their endgame. They couldn't control me directly anymore, so they'd control how others saw me. The shame would drive me back into line, back into my assigned role, the self-sufficient daughter who required nothing but was always expected to give. Public humiliation is family discipline. I sat at my kitchen table, fingers hovering over my keyboard, feeling the hot press of tears threatening to fall. They wanted emotion. They wanted me to lash out, to seem unstable and confirm their narrative. Instead, I took a deep breath and began to type. I rarely share personal matters publicly, but sometimes silence perpetuates harm. For those concerned about recent family posts, yes, I left my sister's dinner. Here's why. Calmly, methodically, I documented it all. The college tuition they'd paid for my sister, but not for me. The birthday parties forgotten. The achievements ignored. The family vacations I wasn't included in. I attached photos, my sister's luxurious graduation celebration versus my empty apartment on the same occasion. Text messages showing requests for help met with silence. The dinner seating chart that placed me at the farthest end from family. I don't share this for sympathy, I concluded. I share this because the truth matters. Love shouldn't be transactional. Family shouldn't have a hierarchy of value. I hit post before I could reconsider, then silenced my phone and went for a long walk, the weight of 30 years of pleasing others finally lifting from my shoulders. When I returned, my inbox was flooded. My mother's closest friend. I've always noticed how differently they treated you. My father's sister. This explains so much about family gatherings. Former classmates. I remember how they never showed up for your events. The most unexpected message came from my sister's husband. I've seen it for years. I'm sorry I never said anything. Sometimes the most powerful weapon against manipulation isn't emotion or argument. It's simply the unvarnished truth, laid bare for all to see. In exposing their game, I'd finally found my voice. In the days that followed, something inside me changed. The space that had once been filled with anxiety and desperate attempts to please was now occupied by a steady, unfamiliar calm. I had broken the cardinal rule of my family. I had spoken the unspeakable truth, not in hushed whispers or private conversations, but where everyone could see it. Messages continued to pour in. Some family members, predictably, sided with my parents, hurling accusations of disloyalty. But many more reached out with revelations. I noticed it at Christmas 3 years ago, wrote a distant cousin. The way they laughed when you mentioned your promotion, then immediately changed the subject to your sister's new car. My parents' response was deafening silence. No angry calls. No demands for retraction. Nothing. Their silence spoke volumes. There is no counterargument to the simple truth laid bare. It wasn't about winning a family argument or proving I was right. This was about finally understanding that I deserved the same respect and consideration that should be afforded to any human being. Family isn't a sacred password that grants unlimited access to mistreat someone. I drafted one final message to my parents, not for public consumption this time. I won't be contacting you again, I wrote, my fingers steady on the keyboard. Not out of anger or revenge, but because I've finally accepted what you've shown me all along. That I don't matter to you the way a daughter should. I release you from any obligation to pretend otherwise. I release myself from trying to earn what should have been freely given. After sending it, I blocked their numbers. Not dramatically, not vengefully, just as simply as one might close a door on a cold draft. That evening, I sat on my balcony watching the sunset paint the sky in impossible colors. There was grief, yes, grief for the family I had wanted, for the love I had tried to earn through decades of self-erasure. But alongside it was something stronger, the profound relief of putting down a burden I was never meant to carry. We're taught that blood is thicker than water, that family ties are unbreakable bonds. What they don't teach us is that sometimes those bonds become chains, and that breaking them isn't failure. It's freedom. I couldn't change the past. I couldn't make my parents love me equally or recognize my worth. But I could change the future, my future. I could break the pattern that would have me passing this same wounded inheritance to another generation. Sometimes liberation comes not in grand gestures, but in quiet decisions. The decision to see clearly, to speak honestly, and finally, to walk away. Not as the villain in their story, but as the hero in my own. Embracing a life where I no longer need to make myself smaller to accommodate their limited vision of who I am.